You've heard the argument before. Science versus religion, light versus darkness, reason versus faith. It makes for a tidy story. The truth, as always, is messier, more interesting, and considerably more fatal for some. My name is Charles Darwin. I spent 20 years hiding a manuscript in my desk because I was afraid of what the world would do with it. I understand these people rather personally. 7 stories, some end in fire, some end in vindication. All of them are true. Let's begin. What if I told you that a man was burned alive, not for committing a crime, not for raising an army, but for saying the universe was infinite? February the 17th, 1600, Rome, Campo dei Fiori, the Field of Flowers. Giordano Bruno was a Dominican monk, a man of the church. But somewhere between the scripture and the monastery walls, he developed a habit that powerful men have always found deeply irritating: thinking. He didn't merely accept Copernicus's idea that Earth orbits the sun. He went further. He proposed that the universe was infinite, that there were countless other suns, other worlds, possibly other life. In 1584, he published these ideas. The church's reaction? Let's say it wasn't a warm reception. He spent 8 years wandering Europe, England, France, Germany, debating, lecturing, irritating everyone equally. Then in 1593, he made the worst decision of his life. He went back to Italy. He was immediately arrested. For 7 years, they tried to make him recant. 7 years in a cell. Bruno refused. Every single time. On February the 17th, 1600, they led him to the Campo dei Fiori and burned him alive. His tongue was pinned, so he couldn't speak his final words. The church won the battle, but today a statue of Bruno stands in that exact square, staring directly at the Vatican. They burned him for an idea. The idea survived. He didn't. Draw your own conclusions. Story 2. The Scopes Trial. What if I told you that a teacher was put on trial for doing his job, and that the church won the trial and still managed to lose completely? July the 10th, 1925. Dayton, Tennessee. Tennessee had just passed a law making it illegal to teach evolution in public schools. Illegal to teach a scientific theory in a school in 1925. John Scopes was a young biology teacher who decided to test this law. He was arrested. What followed became known as the monkey trial. Partly because the press loved drama, partly because the prosecutor genuinely believed my theory meant humans descended from monkeys and found this personally offensive. I'd like to clarify that isn't quite what I said, but I appreciate the enthusiasm. Scopes was found guilty and fined $100. The church won the trial, but the prosecutor died 5 days later, exhausted and humiliated after being publicly dismantled on the stand. The law stayed until 1967, but evolution never left classrooms. Science lost the battle and won the war. They put a man on trial for teaching my ideas. I want you to know, I did not enjoy that, but I did enjoy what happened next. Story 3. Hypatia of Alexandria. What if I told you that one of the greatest mathematicians in history was murdered by a mob? Not in a dark alley, but in broad daylight, in the middle of a city street. March 415 AD, Alexandria, Egypt. Hypatia was the head of the Platonist school in Alexandria. Mathematician, astronomer, philosopher. In a world where women were expected to stay silent, she lectured publicly, advised governors, had students travel from across the empire simply to hear her think. Her problem was her friendship with Orestes, the Roman governor, locked in a political war with Cyril, the Christian bishop. Cyril wanted power. Hypatia was advising his enemy. That made her a target. Rumors spread. She was a witch. She was using dark magic. In March of 415, a mob of monks pulled her from her chariot in the street. I will not describe what they did next. Cyril was later declared a saint. Hypatia's name was nearly erased from history for centuries. Some stories don't have a punchline. This is one of them. She was brilliant. They killed her for it. The only comfort is, we still know her name. Story 4. Copernicus. What if I told you that the man who proved Earth orbits the Sun was so terrified of the Church that he waited until he was literally dying to publish his proof? May the 24th, 1543, Frombork, Poland. Nicolaus Copernicus spent most of his life as a church official. He collected rents, administered estates, and in his spare time, casually worked out that everything humanity believed about the cosmos was wrong. By 1510, he had the mathematics. Earth moves around the sun, he was certain, and he told almost no one. For 30 years, his manuscript sat in his desk. He was terrified. His friends eventually forced him to publish. He dedicated the book to the Pope. Brilliant, preemptive flattery. The first printed copy arrived in his hands on May the 24th, 1543. The day he died, he held it, slipped into a coma, and was gone. The church banned his book in 1616. They removed it from the banned list in 1835, almost 300 years later. He waited 30 years out of fear and died the day he finally published. I waited 20 years out of caution. Perhaps we were both too patient, but we were right. Story 5. Michael Servetus. What if I told you that a man escaped from the Catholic Inquisition and ran straight into the Protestant Inquisition? Some days you simply cannot win. October the 27th, 1553, Geneva, Switzerland. Michael Servetus was a Spanish polymath, doctor, cartographer, theologian, mathematician. He discovered how blood circulates through the lungs. He also had opinions about the Holy Trinity that made every religious authority in Europe want to burn him. In 1553, he published a book challenging church doctrine. Catholics were furious. He was arrested by the French Inquisition. He escaped from prison, which, frankly, is impressive, and fled. His fatal mistake? Passing through Geneva, John Calvin's stronghold. Calvin had corresponded with Servetus for years. He despised him. Servetus was arrested immediately. The trial was brief. On October the 27th, 1553, he was burned at the stake, along with every copy of his book they could find. He escaped one inquisition and walked into another. History has a dark sense of humor. His science survived him. His books didn't. Story 6. Galileo. What if I told you the Pope was Galileo's friend and still destroyed him? June the 22nd, 1633, Rome, Palazzo della Minerva. Galileo Galilei was the most famous scientist in Europe. He confirmed our solar system, discovered Jupiter's moons, built evidence that Copernicus was right. He was also close personal friends with Cardinal Barberini, who became Pope Urban VIII in 1623. Urban actually liked science. He encouraged Galileo to write about heliocentrism, as a theory, not a fact. Then Galileo published his Dialogue, a masterpiece and a catastrophic political mistake. He put all the weak arguments for geocentrism in the mouth of a character called Simplicio. Everyone assumed Simplicio was the Pope. The Pope did not appreciate this. Galileo, aged 69 and in poor health, was summoned to Rome. He recanted. He had no real choice. House arrest for the rest of his life. He died in 1642, still confined. In 1992, 359 years later, Pope John Paul II officially admitted the Church had been wrong. It only took them 3.5 centuries. He called the Pope's argument stupid, in print, under his own name. I hid my manuscript for 20 years and still got called the devil. Galileo had courage, questionable judgment, but courage. Story 7. Darwin. What if I told you that the man who terrified the entire church was married to a deeply religious woman who prayed every night that he would find God before he died? November the 24th, 1859, London, England. By now, you know my name. I'm Charles Darwin. And yes, I'm going to tell my own story. I think I've earned that. I returned from the Galapagos in 1836 with notebooks full of observations that led to one inescapable conclusion. Species change over time. Life evolves. Natural selection is the mechanism. God, in this model, is optional. I knew what this meant. I'd read about Bruno, about Servetus, about Galileo. I sat on my manuscript for 20 years. My wife Emma, brilliant, kind, deeply Christian Emma, wrote me a letter asking me gently to consider her feelings, her faith. I never stopped loving her for it. I never stopped working either. When Alfred Russel Wallace arrived at the same theory independently in 1858, I had no more time to wait. On the Origin of Species was published November the 24th, 1859. The first edition, 1,250 copies, sold out the same day. The Church's reaction was exactly what I expected. Bishop Wilberforce asked my friend Huxley whether he was descended from an ape on his grandmother's or grandfather's side. Huxley replied that he would rather be descended from an ape than from a man who used his intellect to mock science. The crowd went wild. Today, the Vatican officially accepts evolution. I was buried in Westminster Abbey next to Isaac Newton. My wife's prayers didn't change my science, but I hope, wherever she is, she's found something to smile about. 6 stories of men and women who looked at the world honestly and paid for it. Some with their freedom, some with their lives. I got called an ape and buried next to Newton. I'd say science came out ahead. From Hypatia in 415 to Scopes in 1925. 1,500 years of the same argument. Did it end? Well, you're watching this on a device that exists because of science. Draw your own conclusions. They always lose. Eventually,